Hi book friends, I'm Jen. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my February reading wrap-up. If this is not your first video with me, welcome back. If this is your first time here, I would really appreciate your likes, your comments, and your subscribes. We have to make the algorithm happy. Since the beginning of 2025, I have been trying and succeeding on posting a video every Sunday. And last Sunday, the weekend was just so busy and it got away from me and I did not get to post a video last Sunday. So this video is a little bit later than I wanted, but better late than never. Last weekend, we were doing college visits with my daughter and I'm super proud to say that she has picked a college. She committed to Rollins College and will be starting there in the fall. So February was an interesting reading month. I wasn't sure how it was going to go because we did have 3 less days than most months. But let's talk about some stats real quick. In the month of February, my average star rating was a 3.7. So not too bad, not too terrible. I read 4 books physically, 3.5 books on the Kindle, and 1.5 books on audio, because one of those books I did read half on Kindle and half I listened to. So the first 2 books that I want to talk about were misses for the month of February. On my TBR, I had Imago by Olivia Butler. And it was the first book for the month that I decided I wanted to read. And so I picked it up, I cracked it open, I was getting ready to start reading, and something just told me to look up the synopsis before I started reading. And I'm really glad I did because I found out that this was actually the 3rd book in a series. So that is going to have to be a set to the side, read at another time series because I don't have the first book. So since that was a flop, then I decided, all right, well, let's pick up Paradise by Toni Morrison. This is a book that has been on my TBR for quite a while. And I read the first chapter and I was so confused. I did not read the synopsis before going into this and I had no idea what I read. So after I read the first chapter, I did read the summary. And it was almost like I was reading 2 different books. Like maybe the dust jacket was on the wrong book or something. But I decided to keep pushing through and I read the 2nd chapter. I loved the 2nd chapter. I thought that the 2nd chapter was so interesting. So I decided to look up some reviews before I went any further about what other people were saying about this book. And guess what I found out? This was also a 3rd book in a series. But I heard multiple people say that you don't need to read them in order. So I pushed through. I read chapter 3. Chapter 3, again, had no idea what I was reading. So I went to go look up even more reviews. And what I found out was a lot of people are saying that this book, Paradise, is one of the most difficult books to read by Toni Morrison. The writing is just sort of all over the place. It's not very straightforward. And so because of that, I did a soft DNF that, put that over in the pile with Olivia Butler, and I will save those for a later date. Because they were on my 2024 TBR though, I did take them off. So I did count them as not being on my 2024 TBR anymore. So when I do buy the first book in each series, I will just put those onto my current TBR. I was really successful in the month of February at catching up and completing series. So that is something that is super satisfying to me. I read books 3, 4, and 5 in the Heartstopper series. So I do consider that one to be caught up. I do know there is going to be a 6th book. In the meantime, I'm going to watch the TV series with my daughter. It's one of her favorite shows and see how it compares to the book series. I gave the whole series a 3.5 instead of rating each individual book. And I think that this is a great series to read for anybody. Whether you are LGBTQ and you are out, or if you're not out, families, friends, allies, anybody needs to read this book because it talks a lot about the appropriate responses. And it also shines a light on the feelings that people are experiencing in our society with coming out to their friends and family. And it's not always straightforward and as easy as it should be. Book 4 took me by surprise because it really heavily delves into mental health. So the mental health representation in book 4 is amazing, as well as eating disorders. I found book 4 to be fairly emotional. And there was also a scene, and I can't remember which book it was in. I want to say that it was in the 3rd one, where an adult just shows unwavering support to these teens, and that made me a little bit teary-eyed. Overall, I think that the Heartstopper series, while it can be a little cringy sometimes and hard to rate the books individually, I think it's an important read for anybody, and I highly recommend everybody pick it up. I also read and finished, and I think there is a 5th book coming out eventually in this series. So I read the 4th book, The Last Devil to Die, and this is the 4th book in the Thursday Murder Club. This one was my least favorite book, and I don't know if that's because I read the other ones physically and listened to this one on audio, but I just felt like most of the book was not as exciting as the other 3 books that came before it. Towards the end, there was something that happened that was very emotional. And that's also around the time when the story started to pick up steam a little bit for me. I did rate this last book a 3.75, but the series as a whole is a 4.5. And I am considering this series complete or caught up at the very least. I am sad because I do love the characters, and knowing that there isn't another book that I can just pick up right now is a little disappointing. Another series that I caught up with, except for that since I read this last book, the new book came out. So the 3rd book in this series actually came out March 4th. But I just finished the 2nd book in the series in February. So at that time, when I finished it, it was caught up. And that is A Pirate's Life for Tea. This is a cozy fantasy by Rebecca Thorne. The 1st book in the series is You Can't Spell Treason Without Tea. I absolutely loved the 1st book in the series. It reminded me a lot of Legends and Lattes. It was very cozy. There was a bookstore. They were making tea. They were being introduced to people in this neighborhood. They were making friends. However, I like this book a lot less because I did not feel like this was a cozy fantasy in the least. It was a lot slower of a read than the 1st book. I just didn't get the enjoyment that I did out of the 1st book. But I do plan on picking up book 3 and seeing where that takes me. I do think there's only 4 books in the series, so I probably will finish the series. I didn't really dislike this book. Just compared to the 1st book, it was not as cozy. It did not give me the cozy vibes that the 1st book did. It does have beautiful sprayed edges. I love the dedication. To the people who gave me 1-star reviews because the 1st book had lesbians, I doubled the lesbians in this book just for you. And I also love this artwork on the inside. So overall, I didn't dislike this book. Just compared to the 1st book, it was a letdown. And I finished a duology. I read Rebel Witch by Kristen Cicerelli. This is the sequel to The Heartless Hunter. I picked this up as my book of the month pick for February. I rated this book a 4 stars. And I liked it slightly better than book 1. I would say the biggest downfall of this series is that the romance doesn't have a lot of time to develop and give you that giddy 5-star feeling, because the entire book they're denying their feelings for each other and running for their lives, which makes a super interesting read. It's fast-paced. I couldn't put it down. But the romance, although I liked it, although I was rooting for Gideon and Rune, just didn't give me that 5-star feeling. This is a solid duology. It is YA, not a lot of spice. There is some stuff that is talked about, but nothing is on page. Overall, I recommend this duology. The next book I read, actually, I don't know. These books are not in order. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, another 5-star. Everything that I've read from her is 5-star. Love this book. Love the colors, love the sprayed edges, love everything about it. There is some drama over this book. There are people who have read this book and are complaining because it's too spicy. They feel like they weren't warned. The spice in this book does revolve around BDSM, and I do feel like there is an appropriate warning at the beginning of the book. But that being said, For this being about BDSM, a lot of the kink that is surrounding this, a lot of the things that I at least had in my mind when I thought about BDSM is not in this book. This explores trust between two partners who are exploring their kinks. I thought that the spice in this book was absolutely perfect. I have no complaints. I was rooting for the couple 100%. And what I loved is there really wasn't a third act breakup in this book. There was more of a third act hiccup. Overall, I felt like this book appropriately and safely explored the kinks between these two characters. I can see how reading this would open the door to conversation between people who might be interested in this type of thing. This is by far not the kinkiest book I've ever read, so I really don't know what people are complaining about. It was just a 5-star good time. I ate it up. I read it super quick, and I absolutely loved it. On my Kindle, I read Binding 13, and I read this for a book club. I rated it a 3 stars. The first 80% was terrible, and the only reason I kept reading it was because I was leading this book club, so I needed to know what was going on. I needed to know what questions to ask. I thought that the female main character was so whiny. Although I do feel a little bad about saying that because her home life was absolutely shit. This poor girl is poor and she is abused by her father. Her father is just a complete asshole. So she actually legitimately has a lot of stuff to whine about. But it just sort of became almost every single interaction with her was her being super timid, super whiny, super unsure of herself. And also the writing in this book was so drawn out. It is a thick book. It is a chunky book, and it does not need to be that long. There is a scene that is almost a page and a half where the female main character is talking to a dog and saying like, "Oh, good boy, aren't you a good boy?" Almost an entire page and a half of that. Do we need that? Did we need that? I didn't need that. But then let me tell you about the last 20%. The last 20%, it really kicked up. I read through that so fast, I immediately put book 2 on my Kindle. Book 1 literally ends in the middle of a scene. There is no wrap up. There is no cliffhanger. It is just bam in the middle of a scene. First chapter of book 2 picks up right where the first book left off, which I think is a great writing strategy to get somebody to pick up book 2. I probably won't read past book 2, however, because the other books in the series are about other characters. And I'm really only picking up book 2 just to see what happens. It's not because I absolutely enjoyed this book. It is just because I'm super curious. But overall, I would not recommend this book. However, most people in my book club disagree with that. Most people couldn't put it down. They've read the entire series. They just rave about it. There are all kinds of edits on TikTok around this book. And I do think that for me, it could have been a higher star read if it was just shortened a little bit and the female main character was just a little bit more likable and a little bit less insufferable. And the last book that I read is a book that I read to my middle school class. It is called The Lost Year. This is the cover of the book. I can't remember off the top of my head who the author is because I don't have the book with me. It's in my classroom. This is about a boy in 2020. He is being quarantined because of the pandemic, so he's doing online school. He can't go out of the house, and he was tasked with the assignment of helping his great-grandmother who lives with them to clean out some of her boxes of just junk. And he comes across some papers and some drawings and some other information from her life as a little girl, and that sparks a discussion between him and his Gigi, and he learns a lot about her life in the 1930s in Ukraine during the famine, and some secrets are uncovered, and we learn some surprising stuff about his grandma and about his family. And overall, it's just a heartwarming story. There is just enough of a twist in it to keep your attention. I think it's a really important read, and I'm really glad that I read it to my class. Overall, I gave it 4 stars, which is pretty good for a middle grade book. So those are all the books that I read in February. So let's talk about my 25 and 25 bingo board because I did get 4 squares covered up. I covered up the 2025 release square with Deep End. A book that involves travel, I used A Pirate's Life for Tea. A book with a number in the title, Binding 13. And a book with mental health rep, I used Heartstopper. If you're interested in this 25 and 25 bingo board, you can go over to the channel of 4 Paws and a Book, and I will have her information linked below. I started off the year with 85 books on my 2024 reading TBR, and after 2 months, I am down to 80 books. So I'm not actually progressing as fast as I would like through all of my backlist TBR, but I do have a plan to sort of get through a little bit more of that TBR a little bit quicker in April, so you'll just have to stay tuned for that. And I added 3 books in the month of February to my 2025 TBR. I found The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb at my local thrift store, and I was super excited. I picked that one up. I have actually gone to the bookstore a couple of times specifically for that book, and they haven't had it. So when I could pick it up for $3, I was a happy girl. I also picked up, this is probably my most exciting find of 2025 so far. I recently put this book on my Amazon wish list, and I found it at a library sale for $3, and it's a hardcover, and that is Simon Jimenez, The Spear Cuts Through Water. I have heard such good things about this book, specifically from Chris and Maddie. Here is their information. So really excited that I got this, and that it's in a great condition, and that it's a hardback. An author who I have not read a single book by, but I am super interested in eventually starting to read through her list because she has an extensive backlist of books. And that is Mercedes Lackey. And I love all of her 80s artwork. Look at this on her fantasy books. So whenever I go to the flea market, I look for Mercedes Lackey's books, either in hardcover or paperback. It doesn't matter the condition, just to keep in a collection, just to start a shelf so that eventually I will have her books that are beautiful to display, and I will have them to read. Once I'm done reading Brandon Sanderson, that might take me a couple of years. So I did pick up 3 more Mercedes Lackey's books. And I also picked up Bloom by Delia Dawson. This is a book that was raved about by Sid the Bookworm. Here's her information. And it was a short book, and so I decided to pick this one up because I have been interested in reading this one for a while. Also, while we were on our college tour, before we left, we decided to just Google bookstores near me. And there is a bookshop that opened this year, I think in January, and I've been wanting to go to it, and I had no idea that we were less than 2 miles away from it. It is a Taylor Swift-themed romance bookstore. It is called The New Romantics. So we went in there, and I was tired from the tour. We had already spent money that day. I didn't really have a book in mind, but I did want to support this indie bookstore. So my daughter and I each picked up a bookmark, and I picked up a Pink Pony Club bookmark. And then we drove the 3 hours home. So that's what my February looked like. If you are still with me, I thank you. And I would love to hear from you. Again, it's all about the algorithm. But aside from that, I do love to have conversations with you about what you're reading. Let me know what you read in February. Leave me an emoji. Just say hello. That's all I have for February. Until next time, happy reading.